My name is Chris, and welcome to the Camperdan Files. Alright guys, we just got a package in from Rock Auto. Usually I'm excited about replacing parts, but this one in particular, I'm not so excited about. Many of you have had to replace this before, and unfortunately, a lot of you replaced it a bit too late. Without further ado, let's get this box open so I can show you guys exactly what I got and what we're going to be replacing. All right, guys, so we got our box open. Ooh, we have a magnet. And look, it's a Nissan. Here's our packing slip. And here's our replacement part. So in this box, we have a brand new OEM Hitachi brand idle air control valve. Now, this is something that's been discussed extensively on the forum there at Empora, and the reason being is because of this little gasket here. We're not gonna get that much out of the coolant system today. We're gonna scoop this guy under the engine there and hope that we don't get too much going anywhere else. Also gonna put some cardboard down under there too, just for safe measure. Alright guys, so we have our throttle body nice and clean. I know it might not look that way to you guys, but trust me, we put some love on this thing. Okay? Again, not 100%, but a lot better than what it looked like when it came out, that's for sure. Here's our new Hitachi brand replacement idle air control valve. Again, I did show this to you guys once before. So here's the new idle air control valve itself. Here we have our gasket. I'm trying to be careful not to damage this. So all we're gonna do now is just line that gasket up with the surface, and then just gently lay it where it needs to be. And then we'll come in with our replacement air control valve. I'm gonna line that guy up just like so. And just take your time. They'll go on. They know where they want to live. Alright, so we went ahead and cleared all of our tools from the engine bay. Idling pretty good. We'll take this guy out later and get some coolant replaced in the radiator there, because right now it is a little bit low, plus what we lost earlier from removing things. Okay, sounds pretty good. So yeah, guys, we'll pick this up in a couple of hours. I gotta go make dinner. But yeah. So now we just have to top up our coolant and we should be good to go. Nice. So we're now sitting in Camperdan. Let me just dial the air back there. We have nice hot heat, nice and hot. And he's idling perfectly. This little bugger here is what's responsible for keeping things sealed, and more importantly, keeping your coolant out of your idle air control valve electric motor. So let me bring you guys up to speed on what's been happening with my R50 and what brought me to ultimately fire the parts cannon on this particular component. So a few months back, I replaced the radiator cap on my R50. And at the time when I replaced this radiator cap, I went on to mention that I was noticing that I had some coolant that was coming up missing. And I've searched all over my engine bay, guys. I've checked to see if maybe it's the water pump. I've checked my oil to make sure it wasn't mixing in there. I've checked hoses. I mean, I've checked just about everything. And I could never find the source of the leak. So I replaced the radiator cap nonetheless. And I just went back to life as usual. But a couple of weeks ago, I was on a road trip and I noticed that I smelled coolant. I found that what was happening was that the coolant was being expelled from my coolant reservoir. It was overflowing from there. It was just boiling out. So I was like, what gives? So now I'm thinking all things worst case possible, right? I'm like, oh my God, is this the beginnings of a head gasket failure? Now the truck's not consuming it. I was performing an oil change and I was looking again because I noticed the coolant was low in my radiator. I looked at the reservoir and it was right at the max line. So I'm like, where is this coolant going? But something just told me to look at the IAC again because I've been poking around and looking at that area because I've been doing my homework on this. And I didn't see anything that jumped out until my last oil change. And what I noticed was that the area here on the IAC where it attaches to the throttle body, I noticed right in this crease here where the two surfaces meet, I see flakes or what looks like corrosion. And upon further inspection, I took a pick and I picked it and it flaked off. And it was green. And usually when you see anything that looks like that, it's going to be coolant that has ultimately escaped the system and has dried up and it's just leaving the residue. So that's what's happening, guys. So what I'm going to advise you to do right now, if your IAC is still original to your truck, you guys definitely want to scrutinize it, especially if you have instances where you have some missing coolant and you can't quite figure out where it's going or disappearing to. I would say to closely inspect this thing just to make sure, because again, this little thin gasket, right, is what's responsible for keeping that coolant flowing in the proper places and, more importantly, not getting into the actual motor. So if you guys don't know, I'm going to tell you what this will do ultimately if you don't catch it in time. So the coolant comes in through this inlet and it goes through this chamber, right? And it goes down here. It goes through this chamber, it fills this chamber up from the bottom, and then it goes over and then down into this hole. So when it goes into this hole here, it will then exit right here, right? So the reason why this is set up like this is all emissions based components. So I've been reading on Emporium. What it states is that Nissan put this particular component in line with the coolant system for emissions. So when your vehicle is being started from a cold start standpoint, the coolant will go in here first and essentially warm things up and allow your truck to idle down a lot sooner. More importantly, it's also responsible for keeping your throttle body from freezing up and getting stuck possibly in the winter months. Now, I live in the desert Southwest. We don't really see cold snaps that often. We do from time to time. I'm gonna say the lowest temperature that we've seen here in the Vegas Valley was in the mid-20s. In some places that might be enough to cause issues with your throttle body, but nonetheless, so you definitely want to get the OEM component. You don't want to throw a junkyard part at this because it's going to be 20 years old And chances are it's gonna have the same issues, if not right away, soon down the line. It'll have the same issues. So you might as well just go for new. And more importantly, don't be tempted to get the cheapest generic component. This is a Hitachi brand. Yes, we know that the one that's in the R50 is also Hitachi. And yeah, it did fail. But look at how long it lasted, right? It's lasted quite a while. So we'll replace it with the same. Now, the reason why I say many people discover this and discover it too late is because what happens is that over time, that coolant gets past that gasket, gets into this chamber, and once it gets in here, there's nothing stopping it from getting into this motor. So yeah, you know, when we think about it, it's like, yeah, big deal. It gets into the motor, it burns out the idle air control valve. Big deal. Yes, it is a big deal because what happens is it raises the resistance in this motor and ultimately backfeeds to your engine control computer. And when that happens, it burns out the driver for the IAC. So, like I said, many people have fallen victim to this because they don't take notice of it right away, or worse, the IAC burns out and they just don't know what's going on. And by the time they do realize, yeah, they replace the idle air control valve, but by then the main bulk of the damage is done. Never mind the idle air control valve. And this is a $100 component. That's cheap. But your engine control computer isn't. Yeah, you can get one from the junkyard and replace it, you know, that way, the engine control computer. But the problem is you then have to get it flashed and get your VIN rewritten to that particular computer. And that could get expensive, especially if you don't know a mechanic that's going to be honest and cut you a deal and just do what's necessary. Now, for me, it's even more detrimental because I have a 5-speed R50, which is extremely rare, right? So I don't want to go through that whole rigmarole because I doubt I'll be able to find another 5-speed engine control computer. I know some cars like Hondas, you can take automatic engine control units and chip them and reflash them and stuff to run the manual transmission. I'm not sure if that's the same idea behind the R50 Pathfinder platform. And to be quite honest, I'm not trying to find out. So it's evident that this component has failed and is definitely in need of replacing. But yeah, guys, you definitely want to get the OEM. And if you notice, it says made in Japan. So Japanese made components will last the longest and do the best for you. So don't cheap out on this. Definitely get the OEM Hitachi brand. Like I said, this was $100 at Rock Auto, and it took me about a week to get it. Like I said, we're everywhere, guys. Not kidding. Alright guys, so that's going to do it for today's video. If you found it helpful, go ahead and give it a like. And while you're at it, don't forget to share, comment, and subscribe. Thanks again for stopping by the Camperdan Files. My name is Chris, and until next time, keep using your Pathfinder as a Pathfinder, on or off the pavement.